We're going to go ahead and get started, folks. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for sharing your afternoon with us today. We are really excited to have you join us as we provide our first presentation in the spring series. There are 6 presentations this year, and we are actually going into our 8th annual year with the collaboration between the Pikes Peak Area Agency on Aging and Credit Union Retirement Series. My name is Pamela, and I represent the Area Agency on Aging. And there is a staff person behind the scenes, Jessica McMullen, our Policy and Communications Manager. She's going to be responsible for making sure that this webinar runs smoothly. You're probably already familiar with the Area Agency on Aging, but just as a quick reminder, we specialize in providing senior information, resources, assistance, public education for adults age 60 and over. And we are proud to say that we house the local state health insurance program, commonly known as SHIP, where we provide objective Medicare and health insurance information. This year, as was the case last year, we are pleased to continue the expansion and outreach to the entire state of Colorado and basically anybody who wants to tune in. We have worked hard to provide you with the kind of information you need, and we worked and collaborated with other agencies to give you the resources that you'll find on our website. Some of those agencies are the Colorado Bar Association, the Colorado Area Agencies on Aging, the SHIP offices throughout the state of Colorado, and our local Area Agency on Aging. We'll keep your microphones muted for now, and we'll let our speaker decide how she wants to entertain questions. We may do that at the end, but I'll let her address that as we go through. There will be a survey at the end of this presentation. It will probably come out tomorrow morning, and it's a very exciting survey that has something attached to it, which I will let the Emma Protzik address. She is our ENT representative for this evening. So with that in mind, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Emma. She has been working for ENT for about 5 years and originally served as a member service representative, and she is now a financial coaching program lead, as well as a certified credit union financial counselor. She'll say a few words about ENT and their partnership with the AAA and our exciting little survey. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Pamela. So like she mentioned, I'll share a little bit about ENT for those of you that aren't familiar with us. We're turning 65 this year. We were founded in 1957, and for the 4th consecutive year, we are Colorado's largest credit union and also ranked Colorado's #1 credit union by Forbes. We're a not-for-profit financial institution driven by our mission to improve our members' financial quality of life with better rates, lower fees, and unparalleled products and services. We're just over $8.5 billion in assets, and we have over 430,000 members and over 45 convenience service centers all across the Front Range. We are an equal housing opportunity and equal opportunity lender as well, insured by the NCUA. You can visit ent.com, that is ENT.com, for some more information. Like Pamela mentioned, it's our 8th year partnering with the Pikes Peak Area Agency on Aging. So excited for this series every single year. And for the survey that Pamela mentioned, we are giving away a $50 Amazon gift card each time. So make sure to fill that survey out. We'll pull the winner of that gift card from whoever completes those surveys. And you can complete them for all of our sessions. So make sure to join us next week and the next couple of weeks after for some more information on retirement. And I will pass it back over to Pamela to introduce our wonderful speaker for the evening.
Thank you, Emma. Appreciate it. We are honored to have with us again this year the renowned Jane Barton. She is the founder of Cardinal, LLC. She is a local aging expert who collaborates with the Colorado AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons. She specializes in educational programs, books, videos, podcasts, and blogs to assist people in confronting the daunting challenges of aging, serious illness, and the end of life. Please join us in welcoming Jane. It's all yours, Jane.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And I didn't know I was renowned. So
oh, yes, you are.
Now the pressure's on. I'm going to have to live up to this, right?
Yeah.
So I'm delighted to be here. Allow me to share my screen with you so you can look at something other than my mug for the next 50 minutes or so. and away we will go. I want to begin by extending my heartfelt thanks to the Area Agency on Aging in Colorado Springs, and certainly to Pamela. She's always so gracious in inviting me to participate in this program every year. I think I may be on year 4. And I also want to extend my thanks to Ent Credit Union for the sponsorship. And I didn't realize I had so much in common with this organization. I too turned 65 this year, having been born in 1957. So now I have a little bit more resonance with this particular organization. And certainly to all of you who are opting to tune into this programming, I send you a very warm welcome through cyberspace. Although we can't be together, technology has served this wonderful bridge over the last 2 years that allow people from a variety of different locations to gather to talk about some important situations and topics. Let's see here. So just a little thumbnail sketch. I know that Pamela did a great job introducing me, but I want to send out a special thanks to AARP Colorado. They're helping to sponsor some of my speaking fee tonight. They're one of my clients that I've worked with, gosh, now for almost 9 or 10 years, and they're committed to community education. And I'm passionate about that, obviously, since I serve as an educational consultant. My company is Cardinal LLC, and having been the founder of this in 2011, I've been able to do what I love every day for the past 11 years, and that is to serve as a speaker, writer, and a listener. And I focus on the topics I'm passionate about: aging, end-of-life care, and caregiving. So I'm really excited for our topic tonight, talking about how we prepare for retirement, how we imagine that, how we envision it. And it's more than a financial challenge. As we will note over the course of our conversation, we need to prepare emotionally, mentally, as well as psychosocially. So for our time together, for about the first 50 minutes to an hour, I will just babble away. So if you have questions that bubble up, I invite you to place those in the chat box, or you can just write them down on a piece of paper so you don't forget them. And then when I conclude my prepared remarks, I will unshare my screen. We will come back together as a community, and I would love to hear your questions or your comments, or maybe even some stories you might want to share about how you are planning to retire and what your design might include. So again, welcome to this discussion about retire by design, create a life that you absolutely love. Now, retirement is a process. It's an iterative process, something we contemplate and we tweak and we refine and perhaps maybe make some massive changes along the way. And it requires a tremendous amount of knowledge and forethought and planning. Now, granted, retirement is just one step in our overall aging process, moving from infancy into elderhood. But I think we need to appreciate the relationship between the process of aging and also the process of retirement. If you consider the big picture, you just kind of pull back and you consider the interconnectedness of these two different processes. Retirement is informed by how we age. And we're going to consider 3 specific aspects or facets of aging that dial into this. So I want us to consider these particular points in our discussion. First, we're going to look at the biological process of aging. This is phenomenally important in how you will retire and how well that experience will unfold for you. We're also going to look at the players. We recognize that we all age uniquely, but we age in community. So who are you going to share this journey with? Who do you want to share this journey with? And then finally, we'll talk about the importance of the setting or the environment in which we are aging. And can we age well? And if we're aging well, how does that dial into retiring well, planning for that? So we have a lot of ground to cover. In many ways, this is kind of the 30,000-foot flyover. But perhaps something I say tonight will kind of catch your attention and maybe prompt you to do a little bit more contemplation on it, reflection, and some research. And that is a good thing indeed if you are to retire by design. So let's first consider the process of aging, and we'll use the metaphor of the journey of aging. Now, like any other journey you may take, the first thing we need to contemplate is, how long is this journey going to be? So imagine you're thinking about traveling to the mountains west of Denver. Are you going for the weekend? Are you going for a month? Do you want to stay up there for 4 months? Well, depending on your time frame, you're going to pack differently for that journey. You're going to have a different mindset. You're going to have different expectations of that journey. Well, the same is true for life and aging. And we have to recognize that over the last century, so much has changed because we have added over 30 years to life expectancies for human beings. 30 bonus years. What do we intend to do with that extra time? And how long can we expect to live? Well, if you look at the most recent data, this was published shortly after 2020. It's estimated that women will live to 80 or 81 and men 75 to 76. And you notice a little downturn on the right side of this graph. That is the consequence of the global pandemic. We lost a year and a half of life expectancy due to that global virus. Now, granted, once the dust settles, I say hopefully, once that happens, we will no doubt see a return back to an upward kind of graph, because there is the expectation that for generations born in this day and time, over 50% of those individuals can anticipate living beyond 100 years of age. But for our generation, I'm a boomer, perhaps you are as well, we can expect to live much longer than our parents did, and certainly longer than people did in the early part of the 20th century. Just consider this: if you were living in 1900, you were expected to live to the ripe old age of 47. Now, that's a very different mindset and expectation than living to close to 80. How do we plan for that? How do we fund that financially? And how do we kind of parse out our lived experience in different stages and phases in that maturation process of human development? So it's very different today, and we're very fortunate to have these bonus years, if you want to look at it that way. So contemplating the length of our journey, what lies ahead? What are you imagining? What are you hoping for? Or perhaps what are you fearing? Well, the image that you have on the horizon is going to be predicated on how you view this process of aging. And since we live in a culture in the United States where the predominant societal view of aging is denial, sometimes that image on the horizon is not painted as a rosy picture, because we live in an age-denying society. That is the predominant attitude. We are not going to go gentle into that good night, right? Because we imagine that getting old is somehow equated to something onerous or bad. Hence the multi-billion-dollar anti-aging industry. We don't want to go there. Now, ultimately, that attitude is not going to serve us well, because it generates a lot of anxiety and fear over a process we can't control. We initiate the aging process the moment we pop out of that womb. We get that little pat on the bottom, we take in that first breath, and we start changing at the cellular level, a continuous process of change. We are aging right here and right now. I'm just full of good news tonight, right? But if we're afraid of this process, if we're afraid to look ahead and contemplate what it's going to be like to be older, then we're going to procrastinate. We're going to put it off, and we fail to plan. Hence, we age and retire by default. We can become a victim of our circumstances instead of aging by design, which will serve us much better. Now, I know maintaining a balanced perspective about this whole idea of aging, it is very hard, because the messaging is incessant, day in and day out, on TV, on the radio, on the internet. The overwhelming theme is that, oh, we revere youth, and we have lotions and potions. You can do nip and tucks. all of the things that the anti-aging industry is pushing. Now, please know I'm right there with you. I'm a little concerned about the aging process as well. But having learned a lot about aging and also appreciating many of the blessings that come with it, I'm certainly not as fearful of this process as I was when I was much younger. So, by understanding how we age, we can have realistic expectations for the future, and we can anticipate those likely changes, and we can adapt to them. We can do it in a very, I think, positive way, not being negative about it because, okay, we understand what to expect. We're prepared. So, one of the things we should expect that we will have changes in our health. This is vitally important to recognize. And the changes in health, changes in our abilities, changes in our physical ability as well, maybe strength. So we're going to consider aging as this continuous process of change. And looking ahead, we're going to highlight what we can expect first related to physical changes. What's on the horizon as a natural consequence of getting older? I'm not talking about a disease process here just yet. So first and foremost, we're going to change externally as well as internally. Now, again, sometimes we perseverate on those external manifestations, those sometimes exhibited symptoms that we are getting older, such as gray hair and wrinkles and the ravages of gravity. Everything is moving to the south. Now, I'm from Texas. That shouldn't bother me, but it does, just to be honest. Now, the internal changes, I think, are actually much more concerning. And that has to do with changes in all of the internal systems that sustain life biologically, like our cardiac system, our respiratory system. All of those things change as a consequence of getting older. Now, with that said, there is some breaking news, some good news for the boomer generation and younger generations. And that is that we are not only living longer, we are living healthier and more active lives. Now, that doesn't just happen. This compression of morbidity, as it is referred to, pushing disability later in life. So we have more years that are good years. That's more than just luck. It's actually related to whether we dance through life or whether we are sidelined by life. It's related to our intentional choices on how we choose to live, our lifestyle. Now, that should be music to our ears because we can intentionally choose. That means we have some control on this aging process. Now, this all started in 1998 when a research report was revealed, and it said that 70% of how we age correlates to our lifestyle choices on whether we drink. Do we smoke? Do we exercise? Do we have a supportive community, having mutually beneficial relationships? Do we engage in preventative care? All of those things were massively important in the aging process. Now, that's 70%. 30% directly correlates to our genetic makeup, what we inherited from our parents. So lifestyle impacts how we age, which means that impacts how we will retire as well. Now, preventative care was also highlighted in this report as an essential part of the plan of aging. That is why, starting after 1998, many health insurance providers were all on board of saying, hey, your wellness exam, there's no copay, there's no charge, because they recognized it was cheaper to insure healthy individuals as opposed to those who already had a diagnosis of an acute or chronic condition. So preventative care, that is the name of the game. We want to keep disease at bay for as long as possible, because once we have a chink in our armor and disease invades this biological shell in which we reside, it's as if we put our foot on the accelerator of aging, and we can see a precipitous decline. Now, I used to hear these stories reflected by individuals and families that I served while serving as a chaplain and a community educator in hospice. I remember one family in particular The daughter was talking to me after we had admitted her mother into hospice care. And she really looked pretty dazed and confused. And so I just sat down to talk to her, and she shared with me that it was just shocking that her mom was ready for hospice care. She said, up until 6 months ago, she said, my mom lived independently. She was vital and vibrant and engaged. She did everything she wanted to do until she fell and broke her hip. And she said that was the turning point. She said it was a train wreck. And since then, she's developed all these other problems. And now here we are. My mom is expected to live less than 6 months. And that's what happens. That's why preventative care is so vitally important, as well as our intentional choices about how we choose to live. Because disease not only reduces the quality of life, but also the quantity of life. Important factors to keep in mind. So being proactive, it pays life-giving dividends. It's worth our while to pay attention to this and dial this in to our design for aging and our design for retiring. Now that's on the physical side of aging. Now let's consider some cognitive changes that we should expect. Again, not talking about a disease process. As we get older, we can anticipate that the processor slows down, meaning the brain. And this can be incredibly frustrating. It can also be frightening for some people, thinking that something is wrong, that perhaps they are developing some form of dementia. But what happens as we get older, we recognize that we have a change in our ability to pay attention, meaning we are not taking all the information in that is available around us. So sometimes we're distracted, but sometimes it's due to changes in sensory perception. We don't hear as well and we don't see as well. And so if we aren't bringing in all that information, sometimes it takes us a little bit longer to make some decisions. And also because the processor is slower, we need a little bit of time to ruminate on important decisions. Again, not indicative of a disease process, merely of aging. So I liken this change to differences in internet speed. So when I was 21, I was hooked up to high-speed internet. And if you asked me a question, boom, I had an answer for you. Could I remember a name and a telephone number? Absolutely. Could I do a calculation in my mind? Yes, no problem. Now today, it's as if I'm hooked up to the old dial-up modem. And I make strange sounds as I'm trying to get online, and I have to be patient until I get that little message that says, you are online, Jane. Now start flipping through all the filing cabinets. My database is not corrupted, but I need a little more time to find a specific point of data. Again, that can be frustrating because I usually find it at about 3 a.m., 10 hours after I needed it. Now, I say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but it's very important to recognize this is a natural part of aging because there is a prevalent fear in our country about developing dementia as we age. And if you have dementia as part of your legacy, your medical legacy in your family, this is real and it is raw. But this is where knowledge is power. We need to keep a balanced perspective about our cognitive processes of aging. Less than 10% of individuals between the age of 65 to 85 will experience some form of dementia. The group at greatest risk of dementia are those individuals over 85 years of age. So I'm not saying it's insignificant, but I am saying this. If you have a moment in which you forget a name, you forget where you put your car keys, if that just occasionally happens, don't take the leap and jump to the conclusion that this is early onset Alzheimer's. It may just be a natural part of your aging process. If you're truly concerned about it, then go to a doctor and get an accurate assessment, an accurate diagnosis, maybe to alleviate some of those fears. But just realize we're all dealing with this as we get older. So is there anything we can do about it? We talked about physiologically, we can make some good choices about how we're going to live that can reap great benefits as we get older. Can we do the same with our brains? Absolutely. Researchers and professionals in the area that study this for their profession, they say, hey, be a lifelong student, stretch and strain those neurons, dive into a new topic, learn a new language, maybe challenge the right side of your brain and learn how to play a musical instrument, be more creative. All of those things go a long way to keep you engaged and curious and connected with life. If you're looking to embrace some educational opportunities, they are within reaching distance if you have a technological device, such as a smartphone or a computer or some sort of tablet. One of the best places I go for classes, because it's free and it's phenomenally good. You can attend classes offered by universities throughout the world. It's Coursera.org. And you can take a class on literally anything. And once registered, you can pull up the different modules at your convenience. If you love to read and contemplate and research in the morning, you can do that. If you'd rather do it at night, that's your choice. There are also some lifelong learning possibilities along the Front Range here in Colorado. Many offer online modules as well as in person. In the Colorado Springs area, there is the Pillar Institute, which has been around for years, if not decades, if I remember correctly. There's the OLLI programming, that is a national organization, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. They actually have an affiliation with the University of Denver, and they have several campuses scattered around town. And then there's an organization called the Academy, also here in Denver. But if you're close to a large metropolitan area, I think just about everyone has some sort of lifelong learning for older adults. And it's a great way to learn, but it's also a great way to connect to other people. So it helps with socialization as well, building communities. Or if you want to go back to a state university and audit a class, there are reduced or waived university tuitions, and it depends on the state in which you live. Some the age is 60, some 62. I think maybe even a few require you to be 65 years of age. But when I start to wind down my business and I have a little bit more time, I can hardly wait to get back on campus because I just so love that environment and interacting with people of different ages and sitting in a class and absorbing that energy and that knowledge. Now, it's not just about taking information in that helps us cognitively. We can also push that information out. We can share it with other people by investing ourselves in the next generation or maybe our grandkids. Maybe you can volunteer at some of the schools located by where you live and help some of the kids that are having trouble with reading or maybe learning a different language. There are a myriad of ways that you can share what you know, tease out the wisdom that you have earned over a lifetime, and pass that along to those that will follow in your steps. So I think this knowledge exchange, it can actually be an exchange of gifts as well. Because again, it's not just about cognitive health. It also helps us emotionally and also with our social aspects. So stay curious and stay connected. It's going to serve you well over the long haul. Now, in regard to both the changes that we can naturally expect physically and cognitively, keep this in mind. The reason that I emphasize this first and foremost when we talk about retiring and aging by design, a change in health is a game changer. It can totally deviate you from your trajectory where you think you're headed. And once you have a diagnosis, you're going to be pulled in a different direction. And it's not just an individual challenge. It will change life for your family and your friends that you rely on because they may be required to care for you, called to care if this is a chronic or terminal condition. So we want to stay well as long as possible and be intentional about the choices that we make. So lifestyle, It is key to how we age, and we have control over that. So make good choices. Now, the next point we're going to want to discuss tonight about this whole design of retirement is considering who your traveling companions are and who they're going to be, the players in your design. So we noted early on that we all age uniquely, but we age in community. We have family and friends, colleagues, our faith community, neighborhoods. We can go on and on about all the people that you're connected with. So looking to the future, I want you to consider these questions in relationship to your traveling companions. With whom will you hang? When you look forward, who do you imagine sharing this journey with? Or maybe phrased a little bit differently, who do you want to get older and weirder with? Now, this is the phrase that I use with my friends because we definitely are old and we are weird, and we're only going to magnify that as we continue on. And it also, I think, sets a positive attitude that we aren't going to take ourselves too seriously. Yes, this is a serious journey, but we're going to have fun along the way as well. So who do you want to hang with? Who do you want to get older and weirder with? And are you taking steps to ensure they are going to be along for the ride? Have you invited them? Do they know that you're expecting their companionship? And more importantly, and this is a little bit more serious, the people that you're traveling with, are they committed to care for you? And are you going to be responsible for their care? So who will care for you and who will you care for as you move into this part of your life? Now, for most of us, when we hear those questions, we think of family first. That comes to mind. Or maybe some dear friends that you consider extended family. Those are our go-to people. These are the folks that we lean on, particularly when times are tough, when we need that trusted person without question. We know they're going to show up. These are the folks that if you call them at 3 a.m., say, get over here, they're going to show up on your front porch in a tattered robe, fuzzy slippers, bed hair, and 2 cups of coffee saying, okay, what's going on? How can I help? That's what you need as part of your design for retirement, your design for aging. Now, that's great to say, but we also need to contemplate, what if we outlive our support system? Have you ever thought of that? A lot of folks haven't. They've never considered that they might be the last one standing. Now, I know this is a somewhat frightening proposition, and you may think, based on your current situation today, that, oh, I have no fear about that because I have my kids, I have my spouse or my partner, I have a great group of friends. I don't need to worry about that. Well, maybe not today, but what about 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road? What if those individuals predecease you or they move to a different part of the country? Have you considered that possibility? Well, if you're like most people, you probably haven't. And it can be a very rude awakening as we move into the latter part of our journey. Now, this isn't a concern for just a few people. In fact, it is a growing segment of our population. If you compare statistics, looking back to 1950, it was estimated that about 10% of persons over 65 lived alone and aged alone. In 2020, that had almost tripled to 28% of those individuals over 65. And there are a variety of reasons for that. A lot of it had to do with intentional choices in the boomer generation. Fewer individuals chose to have children, or they had fewer children. Also, the divorce rate was much higher in the boomer generation. And some people chose not to marry. They actually wanted a life of solitude. So sometimes it was by default, sometimes by design, that these individuals that were surveyed in 2020 ended up living alone and aging alone. So it's a significant number of people. And so there's actually a term to refer to this group. 30 years ago, that term was elder orphan. that has been updated currently, and the more acceptable term is solo ager. But either way, it refers to a person aging alone with little or no support. So this is an individual that even if they may have some adult children, they may live 2,000 miles away. So they're not proximal. If something were to happen, they're not there to care. Or it could be an individual truly who has outlived their support system. Now, this happened to my godmother. I referred to her as Aunt Jane. I am her namesake. But she lived to be 88 years of age. She outlived her husband, her son, and all of her friends. And my Aunt Jane had a huge social network. And so she was really ticked off that she was the last one standing because she was incredibly lonely and she felt so isolated and alone. And even though I was there as her guardian and I absolutely adored her, I wasn't a peer, and that made a difference to her. She wanted to hang out with people that she had created memories with. She wanted to be able to remember when and think about all their raucous adventures and all the trouble they had created over the course of a lifetime. So it can happen. It's something that we need to consider, to have a plan B if this were to actually occur. Now, obviously, aging alone, it presents many challenges. And this has been researched over the last 10 to 20 years. And some of the conclusions based on those studies is those individuals who are aging alone have a lower quality of life, oftentimes because they feel isolated, and that isolation generates a sense of loneliness. They have a shorter life expectancy than those who have a robust social support system. And it's much harder to age in place when you're living by yourself. And obviously, caregiving is tremendously complicated. And if you truly have no one to ask for help personally, and if you have no finances to pay for professional care, that's when some people really find themselves in a pickle and they become desperate oftentimes, not knowing other resources that might be available in the community. Now, when individuals are living alone and aging alone and dealing with the complications of aging, maybe a chronic condition, this can transform what was once a desired solitude into a very life-draining sense of isolation. Now, social isolation is defined as the lack of interaction, sometimes due to situational factors. And a change in health is one of those big situational factors. Remember the game changer. AARP did a survey of their membership probably 5 or 6 years ago now. And it estimated that 8 million people over the age of 50 were affected by social isolation. And that was well before COVID, when we were mandated to isolate and insulate for safety precautions as far as spreading the virus. Now, when we have this sense of social isolation, it can lead to a subjective experience of loneliness. And that sensation, it tells us that something is lacking, it's missing. We need other people. We're missing that human contact and connection. What we also recognize well before COVID landed on our shores is that loneliness is very common, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And the incidence of chronic loneliness has been growing over the past 5 to 10 years. Additional to that, what medical researchers have recognized is that chronic loneliness is now viewed as a health risk factor because it does affect our health and well-being ultimately. It's equal in its implications to obesity, lethargy, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and smoking. This is serious stuff. And so we need to be concerned about this. We need to be aware of this possibility. Because chronic loneliness, it is counter to our inherent nature as human beings. We are relational creatures. David Brooks talks about this in his book, The Second Mountain. He notes that we are intensely social creatures, deeply interconnected with one another. And the idea of the lone individual rationally and willfully steering his or her own life course is often an illusion. And he does a tremendously good discussion about this idea of rampant individualism in our country today. And he said it actually is catastrophic because it's wearing away at the fiber, at the fabric of our social connectedness. And we need that. We need each other because the bottom line is we are all in this together and we are better together. Now, this was poignantly highlighted in a story that I read about on a blog that Maria Shriver posted. Gosh, this has been 6 or 7 years ago now. If you're not familiar with her blog, it's called The Sunday Paper. Comes out, strangely enough, on Sunday, once a week. And I love her reflections because they are inspirational. They are very touching, sometimes incredibly challenging. And on this one occasion, she shared a story she had heard on TV of a woman that lived in California, and she was 90 years old. And this woman had been a caregiver for many years for her aging husband, who had a progressive condition and ultimately died. And she recognized after his death a realization that many caregivers have, that she had become tremendously isolated. She'd just been so focused on that journey of caregiving. And her kids didn't live in California, and she'd somewhat ignored her friendships from years past. And she was desperately lonely. And so she took a brave and a bold action to try to change that scenario. She got up one morning and she had sticky notes and she put them on the front doors of all her neighbors that surrounded her. And on this note, she wrote, "Would you consider to become my friend? I'm 90 years old, live alone. All my friends have passed away. I'm so lonesome and scared. Please, I pray for someone." Now, later that day, this woman's prayers were answered. One of her neighbors pulled into their driveway, saw that little sticky note flapping in the breeze, and this woman and her teenage daughter went up and read it. And at the bottom was the name of the woman with her telephone number and her address. So they turned around, they found the home, they walked across the street, and they knocked on the door. And the 90-year-old woman opened the door to her two new friends. They committed to care for each other in that moment. Now, there was a picture posted on Maria Shriver's blog of the three women that had been taken by a local news station, and they were absolutely glowing. It was a gift for all of them to connect, to develop a friendship, and to share the journey with each other. And each generation represented, they had something to offer. They had something to contribute. And they certainly had a journey to share. So this is a vitally important part of our lived experience, identifying who we want to share this journey with. It's an integral element of your design to retire and to age well. So don't be shy today. If you're feeling a little bit lonely, or if you anticipate that down the road, realize that we all need caring, committed, and courageous companions in this journey. So reach out, be brave and bold like that 90-year-old woman. Create a supportive network that will serve you well, a network that you can contribute to as well. Nurture lifelong friendships, and that may actually consist of maybe visiting Facebook, maybe finding someone from your high school or college days and rekindling some of those connections that you had. Or perhaps it's about making new friends. Now, I know it's harder to make friends as we get older. We see that borne out by research and statistics. But I like to encourage people to make new friends of all ages, because I think that enriches the experience for all of us. But realize as we continue our journey forward, there is some truth to the old adage that you can't have too many friends. This is a vital part of your design to retire well and to be well. So let's move into our final point of discussion tonight before we can hopefully have some lively conversation and address some of your questions. We're going to talk about the setting, the environment in which you will age, the environment in which you choose to retire. Housing is a critical component of your retirement plan. But I want you to keep this in mind. It's not just a financial discussion, although it is. It's not just a logistical and practical discussion, although it is. It's also an emotional discussion, because home is where the heart is. Where you consider home, you have some deep roots. You feel as if you belong. You feel comfortable and confident and somewhat in control. And to contemplate transitioning from that home, that can be really frightening. It can generate a lot of anxiety. So my intention is not to frighten you. Instead, it's to highlight some of the options that may be available to you if you want or need them in the future. Because we have to recognize, as we age, our needs are definitely going to change, but sometimes our wants will change as well. Maybe what served us well when we were 40, not so much at 90. I was actually down in Colorado Springs. This has been maybe 6 or 7 years ago, presenting a program similar to this one. And we were talking about location was so vitally important, talking about how some people had moved to the Denver area, Colorado Springs, when they were young, and they wanted to be up in the foothills. They wanted to be somewhat secluded. They loved the winter season and all the snow that fell. And this woman said, that was me. That was my family. And the woman, when I met her, was in her early 80s. And she said, this is a disaster for me now because my husband died a few years ago. I can't manage the property. And I feel like I am stranded in the winter months. And it's a huge risk factor for me if I have a healthcare crisis. I can't get into town. So this is critically important to contemplate. Location, location, location. What worked when we were 40 may not be a prime location when we're 90. So housing, what we're trying to find is an environment that we can age well and be well, the right size, the right location, the right price, and the right community. So in order to age well in place where you currently are, you have to see beyond this moment in time, beyond your nose. So you may be sitting there hearing me talk thinking, well, thank you very much, but I'm just doing quite well. I don't need to worry about relocating or doing anything to my current residence. Well, that's true for today. But if you look down the road, what if you fall and break your hip? What if you are diagnosed with a progressive condition like Parkinson's disease? Is it still going to be a life-giving environment? And if not, how can we be proactive in perhaps anticipating some physical and maybe even cognitive changes? So let's seriously consider the situation. How can we assess it? What would that assessment process look like? What should we consider? Well, first, the residence, where you are. That's the best place to start, right? Right here, right now. So for example, if you have lived in the same residence for the last 20, 30, 40 years, which some of us have, we certainly have aged, but so has our property. And so today, does it require a little brush up, maybe some maintenance? Are you concerned about some things about the house? Is it comfortable for you today? Is it easy to navigate? And what about taking care of the yard? And also your neighborhood has aged 20, 30, 40 years. Do you still feel safe there? Do you know your neighbors? Do you feel as if you needed some help, you could run across the street and get some? So all of those things you need to look at honestly and say, well, I don't know if I really want to invest any more in this property. Maybe the conclusion is the money is better spent on a new residence, smaller, maybe a ranch style, or moving to a long-term care community. Those are things that you can determine, but you don't want to wait for the crisis when you have to move. It's better to think about this during a time when things are calm, when you have things under control, and you can make informed choices. So assess your residence, then assess yourself, your current abilities and disabilities, and be honest. Data shows us that most of us will say we feel 10 years younger than our chronological age. Well, do you really? Are you really capable of that physically and cognitively? And so is that a good match with where you currently reside and your abilities and disabilities? And then think a little further down the road. What about future changes? Can you anticipate and plan for those? Well, sometimes we can. Sometimes we have things come out of left field. There's no way to anticipate that. But I want to share a story with you about some neighbors of mine that had a rude and just heartbreaking realization. And this happened about 20 years ago. When I moved to Denver, the first neighbors I met lived right next to me, just a lovely couple. They were probably in their early 70s when I met them. They welcomed me to Denver. They were just so accommodating and helpful. I adored them. And they shared with me that they had designed the home they lived in. It was their dream home. It was their last home. And they had everything they wanted. They'd landscaped the backyard beautifully, had a water feature, and they just glowed when they were describing this. Well, you might imagine my surprise about 10 years later when they were putting up a for sale sign in the front yard. And I was heartbroken. I ran over there and I talked to the gentleman. I said, "What are you doing? You can't leave me." It was all about me at that moment. And he looked at me and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, "Oh, Jane," he said, "we're going to have to move." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, when we built this house, we put all the bedrooms and all the full bathrooms upstairs." He said, "I don't know why I didn't think about it. But, my wife has diabetes and she's developed neuropathy in her feet. And it is very difficult for her to climb the stairs anymore. And I'm so afraid she's going to fall. So we've made the hard choice. We're going to sell the house and buy a ranch. And that's what we're going to have to do." Now, I knew he was making the right decision, but how I wished they had been able to anticipate that change and redesign their home when they initially built it. So I share that story so that you will not be tripped up by the stairs, figuratively or literally in your own scenario. But far too often, we just plan for this moment, for what we're currently capable and able of doing. But we know we're going to change physically. We know that's probably going to happen to each and every one of us. So do we have a design that will accommodate that aging process, that will allow us to age well and retire well where we are? So it's important to proactively evaluate your options, to consider not only what you want, but also what you need. So if what you want is to age well in place, right where you are, you don't want to think about transitioning to any other location. The first thing that you might want to consider is some home modifications. Now, there are some contractors that actually specialize in working with older adults, and they can easily modify, and financially, they can affordably modify a house to make it much more safer as we get older. For example, if you see the stairs going into this house, you could transform that into a ramp. If you need accessibility with a wheelchair or a walker, you can widen the door frames again for that same accommodation. Change doorknobs into levers. So if you have issues with arthritis, much easier to navigate. You can install grab bars in the shower, Maybe even remodel a shower. Instead of the tub shower configuration, you do a roll-in shower. So there are a lot of things that may be possible, and this could buy you some time to stay where you are, or it may serve you for the long haul. It just depends on the specifics of your current situation. Now, many individuals are learning that a lot of care can be offered in the home. So even when you have ever increasing needs, you can hire organizations that offer medical and non-medical services. Now, depending on where you live, they have a different price point. But this has been a game changer for the boomer generation. When diagnosed with a chronic or terminal condition, you don't have to move to an acute care setting. You can stay in your home and receive some really good care in the comfort of the place that you feel as if you belong. Now, smart home systems also can allow us to live safely, conveniently, and also comfortably. There are all kinds of gadgets out there that you can check into, whether it's a security system, monitors that will track your every move in your home. You can have first alert systems in case you have a medical crisis. So a lot of things that will help to ensure your safety. Now, for comfort and even socialization, we have all kinds of devices that help us to connect technologically with our family and friends, whether it's Zoom or some other platform that you prefer to use. We have entertainment that we can access using voice commands. So there are a lot of things that can, again, enrich the lived experience if we're willing to have a little bit of financial expenditure on that front. And what about personal care robots? I don't know if in my lifetime this is going to become the norm, but certainly there's a lot of research being done on robots that can help us with activities of daily living. Japan is leading the charge on this. And actually, it's not that uncommon for people to either own robots or lease them. So pay attention to this area of research technologically. You might actually get to test drive one of these days. Now, again, if you want to stay where you are as you age and you retire, but you have some additional needs that you need some help with, you may have a family member that's willing to move in with you for a short period of time, maybe helping you after a hip replacement, or they may be willing to move in if you have a chronic and progressive condition to be with you until the end of your journey. Again, that's just going to depend on your family situation and the relationships that you have. So there are options to stay where you are, to age well in place. But if a move is required or desired, what are the other setting options, environments that you might want to consider? Well, 25% of persons over the age of 65 will choose to move in with another family member, usually an adult child. Now, this may be a cultural norm, could be a preference, or it may be necessitated because of limited financial resources. But either way, what we need to remember is that when another person enters a home, it totally changes the dynamics and the equilibrium within that home. And it takes a little bit of time for everybody to find their balance, to find their little piece of ground that they can stand on. So you have to renegotiate boundaries. You need to discuss ground rules and roles and responsibilities. Don't just assume everybody knows how things are going to unfold. It needs to be very intentional, and sometimes those boundaries are going to need to be revisited. Another option would be to consider transitioning to a long-term care community, whether you want or need an assisted living, skilled nursing, or maybe a memory-specific care unit. The availability and also the options that you might have will depend on where you live or where you are contemplating moving. So a huge metropolitan area like Denver, you have more options probably than you want to consider. But if you live in a more rural or smaller community, it could be somewhat limited. But understanding the financial implications of all of these options of primary importance, because the cost of this kind of care, it is a hot topic. And I'm sure that if you're contemplating this, you've already done a little bit of research on it, because the financial costs can threaten to break the bank of many a family or an individual that's looking at this. Not to say that you shouldn't, but I'm saying that there is kind of a hefty price tag to some of these options. And a lot of people have to explore this option. 70% of persons over the age of 65 will need some form of long-term care. So how do we go about the research? Where do we start? If you're not an expert in housing, it can be somewhat bewildering. So I have a resource that you might want to write down. I may have put it in the handout associated. I think I did with this program. But there's a wonderful website that is offered by Genworth Insurance Company, genworth.com. And one of the best parts, if you're trying to gather data, you just put in their search engine cost of care. And every year they will post the median cost of care nationally, by state, and also by large metropolitan areas. So you can go in and do price comparisons. So let's say you live in Denver or Colorado Springs today, but you're thinking you might want to retire in Florida. Well, what is the cost of care in Florida compared to Denver, or in New York, or in California? You can easily find out on this website. Now, I also wanted just to highlight how Colorado compares to the national median cost. For non-medical home care, this is predicated on 44 hours a week, which is a lot. You may not need that much. But you'll see the national median cost is approaching $5,000. In Colorado, it's much more expensive, approaching $6,400 a month. Assisted living, again, this is for a private room. Nationally, $4,500 a month. In Colorado, $4,750. Adult daycare, this is predicated on 5 days a week. National is $1,690 a month. And in Colorado, again, more expensive at $1,950. And then skilled nursing, nationally is a little over $9,000 a month for a private room. And in Colorado, it's over $9,700 a month. So again, not to frighten, but to inform you. And once you have the facts, then you can determine, based on your specific situation, what's possible, what is not. Then you can focus on what is possible. What can you afford? You can discuss the financial implications of the various settings, and you can proactively balance the wants, needs, and your finances. Now, if you're doing this in advance, it's much less pressure. You're not scrambling around trying to find something. This could be 5, 10, 15 years in the offing, but you're getting an idea of what it's going to take to get what you want, to get what you need, in light of what you can afford. So we considered, if you want to stay home, how can you age well in place? Some options around that. We considered, if you want to transition, what are some of the housing options? We also need to point out some community considerations, the geographic setting of where you're contemplating aging and retiring. So do you prefer a metropolitan community, or do you like to be in the suburbs? Do you want a smaller little village feel? And will that require a relocation for you? Also consider the weather, consider the seasons. If you've lived in Colorado all of your life, or maybe all of your adult life, are you tired of snow? Do you want to move to the sunny south? And what is going to be conducive to aging well? That may be in light of a recent diagnosis. Is it difficult to tolerate the cold? Is it difficult to tolerate the heat? All of those questions need to be addressed. Certainly, access to healthcare as we get older, this is critically important. Acute care settings as well as long-term settings. Also ask questions about the availability of home health services, medical and non-medical. Again, in larger cities like Denver, numerous organizations and businesses that provide this kind of care. Move into the foothills, just 20 miles to the west, the options are limited. Now, that is true for palliative care services as well as hospice care. And these two models of care certainly appropriate for chronic conditions and then end of life care. So if you want to have accessibility to those different options, that's going to inform the geographic location of your retirement. Now, transportation options, vitally important, because if you get to a point where you don't like to drive or you can no longer drive, is public transportation available to take you to retail services, whether it's groceries or banking, or maybe entertainment or recreational areas. Aha, sorry, we had a little glitch there. We're going back up. So accessibility to services, that certainly is a consideration. And what about the neighborhood that you're contemplating retiring in or staying in? Do you know the neighbors? Do you feel like you have some buddies? Again, people that you can lean on, rely on, and have a lot of fun with. So a lot of things to consider geographically. Now, I want to conclude by highlighting some creative senior housing options maybe you haven't heard of. Now, these have actually bubbled up because of not only the desire of boomers, but the demands of boomers. We were not satisfied with a limited number of options as we got older. And so a lot of really innovative and creative and life-giving ideas for where we choose to age and retire have been created over the last 10 to 15, maybe 20 years. So I want to share a few of those with you. One idea is home sharing, and this is becoming very popular throughout the country. And it goes back similar to the boarding house scenario, where you have someone who owns a home. Maybe they have a bedroom, 2 bedrooms that are empty because a spouse or partner predeceased them. Their kids are off and running with their own lives, and they really don't want to live alone. Well, informally, there are people that are combining households with friends, coming together to say, okay, let's get older and weirder together and share on the finances. Now, I actually did this 16 years ago with my best friend. I didn't know it was home sharing at the time, but we decided we were like sisters. We ran around together all the time anyway, so let's save some money. Well, now we have a couple other friends that want to join us when they retire. So we will probably end up designing our own home that has 4 different master suites with a common area, and we will care for each other as we get older. A lot of people are doing that, but it also generated a new business of matching potential housemates. So I listed 4 on the screen that you might be interested in checking out, but these organizations help individuals to vet potential housemates and to pair up. So Silver Nest actually started in Colorado. I think it's now national. Roommates and Sunshine Home Share. These are all good organizations to look into. And I recently heard of Odd Couples Housing. Sorry, I misspelled couples. I got carried away with the keystrokes there. But the Odd Couples Housing is just fascinating to me because this group will pair an older adult that needs a little help around the house with a younger person who is looking for maybe a lower cost for a rental or a lease. And if that younger person is willing to do a little housework, maybe some cooking or cleaning, or maybe yard maintenance, they get a reduced rate on that rental. And what it leads to are these lovely intergenerational relationships. So if you don't do anything else, please go out to their website and check it out, because the story of how it came to be is just, it's uplifting, it's inspiring, and it may be something you want to check into. So we have shared housing. Co-housing is becoming very popular throughout the country, where you own your own individual home, but you reside in an area where all these houses are built around typically a green belt. So you may have a communal garden, and there is always a common house with a very large kitchen and dining room. And it's the communal meals that this community shares in. It's the glue to that community. It creates the neighborhood. And all the homes usually have big front porches to encourage conversation between neighbors. Now, some are age restricted, some are designed to be intergenerational. It just depends on the particular property. Some examples of co-housing in Colorado: we have wild sage and silver sage up in Boulder. Aria is a property that opened in the last few years in Denver, in downtown Denver. And then there's Casa Verde Commons in Colorado Springs. All of these are noted in your handout. Now, some of these can be incredibly expensive, some are more affordable, but you can check them out all over the country if you're interested in this particular model of living in retirement. Niche communities might be of interest to you, populated by individuals that have a similar passion. So there are niche communities for artists that are painters or sculptors, maybe writers, dancers, a myriad of different passions that are out there that might be appealing to you. So it's a group that has a common cause, a common concern, a common way of being. And so that is kind of the thread that holds everything together. University-based retirement communities, Dartmouth University is the example that I'm showing here. The last time I checked, about 6 months ago, there were 100 of these properties all over the country. We do not have one in Colorado yet. But these are long-term care communities that have an affiliation with an educational institute. So residents in the long-term care community can take classes on campus and utilize all the facilities, the rec center, the library, all of that. And I can hardly wait for one to arrive in Colorado because, as I've already noted, I love to learn. I am a self-professed geek, and this model is very appealing to me. So you might want to, if you're interested in that, just Google university-based retirement communities, and you'll pull up some more detailed discussions on that. Multi-generational living started in 2008 to tick upward, becoming very popular. You'll recall that was when we had a crash in the market. So a lot of kids out of college were boomeranging back into the basement of their parents' home. Well, it hasn't stopped since then. We start to see that families are actually enjoying this, having 3 generations living together. And care goes in both directions. The older adults are cared for by the younger generation, but sometimes the older adults actually provide child care for that family system. And there are actually some realtors and construction companies that specialize in multi-generational floor plans. Lennar Homes and the Toll Brothers are 2 that build homes that allow each generation to have a sense of privacy, but then they have a common area typically on the main floor where everyone can gather. The village model has been around a while. Again, this is very appealing to some neighborhoods to hire administrative oversight that helps to coordinate volunteer work in the neighborhood, kind of connecting neighbor to neighbor and exchanging gifts. One neighbor offers to shovel sidewalks, while another neighbor will offer to do some pet care or child care. And the administrative organization, the management, will also negotiate a lower price point for contractors that come into the neighborhood to do work on maybe painting or electricians or plumbers, whatever it might be. 2 examples in Colorado. A Little Help in Denver actually has moved beyond Denver into other parts of the state. And then the Own and I Village in Colorado Springs, I think it's on the north side of the Springs area. But just a great way to create that space where you feel like you belong, that you feel at home, and that you know your neighbors. The tiny houses are appealing to some folks as they move into retirement to truly downsize. But before you take that leap, if you want to test drive residing in a tiny house, you can go to Lyons, Colorado. It's called We Casa. And you can check out their website. They have great pictures. I think they now even have virtual tours of some of their properties. And you can determine if this might be a good fit for you or not. Some of the designs for these tiny houses are not conducive to aging well. I don't know that I really want to climb up a rickety, tiny ladder to get to a loft that I have to crawl into to go to bed. That seems to have a lot of safety concerns for me if I'm 85 or 90. So maybe a better option would be a smaller home, but it's universally designed so that you can age well. This is the brainchild of Bill Thomas, these Minka homes, typically 600 to 800 square feet. You can go to his website, myminka.com, and look at the floor plan. But his dream is to make these affordable for those of us who are aging, and also to create Minka communities where people all buy their own Minka home, but they commit to living well together. And he actually prefers intergenerational communities, not age restricted. But the design is lovely. The last time I checked the price, it was about $175 a square foot, which compared to other housing in Colorado, that is definitely much more affordable. So certainly something to consider. So we have talked about a lot of stuff. I've thrown a lot of information out at you, but it's all contained in your handout. Look at the bibliography. It will direct you to some websites as well. So I hope that you heard something of interest, maybe something that you're more curious about than you were before you tuned in this evening. And maybe if you check out a few things that we've noted tonight, you want to get busy and start designing how you choose to age and to ultimately retire. And I encourage you not to be boxed in by cultural norms or societal norms or prejudices about getting older. Let the creative juices flow. Identify what it is you want. Identify what it is you need today and possibly in the future. And let your mind expand. And let yourself get busy designing a life that you love. Confront your fears of aging. Confront your fears about retirement. I think there are so many blessings in this journey, not to discount the challenges, but we need to keep that balanced perspective to be realistically optimistic. Embrace your hopes and retire by design. Create a life that you love. So one last comment that you can ponder on as well. I always like to give you one more thing to chew on before we get into our conversation. If we can be brave and bold, if we can be countercultural, and if we choose to be proactive instead of reactive about this idea of aging and retiring, I think ultimately we can resonate with a sentiment noted by Joan Erickson many years ago. She was known to have said, "To grow old is a great privilege." May it be so for all of us. So a few more resources for your bag of tricks. If you're interested in other programs that I'm doing, all of them are online at this point, free of charge. You can go to my website, cardinallife.com, and click on the events tab. If you see a topic that interests you, just drop me a quick email. I'll add you to the list. If you need a resource on caregiving, I wrote Caregiving for the Genius a few years ago. It's available in most libraries. You can also get it on Amazon. And if you're a fan of podcasts, I dropped a podcast last year, Cardinal Musings with Jane Barton. I try to create a virtual kitchen table where we can gather together and talk about what matters most in life. And more than anything, I want to thank you for your presence this evening. I thank you for your time and attention, and know that I'm wishing you many blessings on your journey. If I can ever be of help to you, don't hesitate to drop me an email at cardinallife@msn.com. I would love to continue the conversation. So now it's time for questions, comments, concerns, stories, whatever you would like to offer related to this idea of retiring by design. If any of you are knee deep in the process, we would love to hear your insights and maybe some resources that you have as well. So feel free to unmute, pull up your video, and let us know what you think.
You have a lot of thank yous, Jane.
Well, yay, my
Yeah.
privilege. Any questions that you noted that I need to address, Pamela?
I don't see any questions at this point. Let me just take a quick look. They're just, they're great, brave reviews in all of this. So I'm curious, Jane, why do you think it's more expensive in Colorado than the national average? Is it because of the mountains and it's supposed to be a privilege to live here, or what's that about? Do you know?
Well, I just think it's the cost of living in Colorado. It's 5% higher than the national average
Yeah, okay.
in general. So I think that just translates across all different categories. But it's,
Yeah.
it's certainly something to consider. I had friends spring of last year, they opted to leave Colorado. They moved to Florida, and it's significantly cheaper in Florida.
Wow.
They had other reasons to go there, family reasons. It wasn't just for the cost of living, but Colorado, I mean, just the cost of living's high.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. What more about transportation besides the public transportation system that we have? Any other creative in your research, any creative kinds of things happening, like housing for transportation?
well, I think in regard to that, there are some folks in retirement, they may opt to live in multi-use areas or the walking neighborhoods like Stapleton
Yeah, okay.
in Denver. So you can buy a home, or, you can have single family dwellings, condos, apartments, or whatever, mixed use land areas. And so within walking distance, if you're able to ambulate, you can access groceries and healthcare and rec and a post office and restaurants. And so you don't have to have a car if you can literally walk to that location. And then hopefully there would be a little bit of transportation afforded to individuals in that neighborhood if they couldn't ambulate. But the other thing that AARP has been involved with for years is this whole concept of livable communities. And so many of the suburbs are being redesigned or retrofitted because, those were designed when I was a kid. They were born when the boomers were born. And so you had suburbs that were designed for young, mobile, active families. But a lot of we boomers stayed in the suburbs and it's not serving us well. In fact, the burbs are referred to as the architecture of isolation and landscape of loneliness for older adults. And it's because of the lack of public transportation, and it's a distance to get to retail services and healthcare. And so many metropolitan areas are saying, okay, we're going to have to go to the expense of putting in some points of, you can access the light rail, you can grab a bus. The beauty of Lyft and Uber, if people can afford that expense, it can come right to their home. And so that has been a wonderful resource for a lot of people.
Excellent. Excellent. Do we have any other questions or ponderings or sharings in regards to all that was presented this evening? It's a lot to think about. It's a lot to think about.
There is a lot to think about in retirement.
Yeah.
And that's why being proactive is it's just a better posture, because you can do it one piece at a time instead of waiting for a healthcare crisis that necessitates an immediate transition.
Right.
Then it's just, you're dealing with all of this all at once.
Yeah.
And it's just overwhelming.
Yeah. We looked at the different components in putting this series together. And so we're looking at the financial piece that will be presented, which is new this year. I failed to mention that earlier in the conversation, but that'll be a new component that'll be presented by by the Ent staff to do that, making the golden years golden. And then we have the estate planning piece of it. For many, that's a real concern. And we have Medicare, the Medicare piece, that's the healthcare coverage. And then we have Social Security, which is tied to the hip with Medicare. And so there's just a lot of things to think about as you put the pieces together, pieces of the puzzle. And what sometimes I think is really challenging is when you feel good now and you feel like you're in good health now, you don't necessarily see the forest for the trees. And that's the disconcerting piece of it, because that can pop up, like you mentioned in your presentation, so quickly. And you can be blindsided by it. And it's right there in front of you. So.
Yeah, and we're trying to avoid, that huge wake up call that you never wanted to have and that you're not prepared for. And in those moments, we tend to have a knee-jerk reaction, or we just do what is efficient, but it may not be the most effective choice ultimately.
Right.
And a lot of folks, when they make those choices in the midst of a crisis, they have a lot of regrets.
Yeah. There was a question about how do we get the booklet that was mentioned. All of the handouts are on our website for this presentation that was presented today, that Jane presented. Is there, I'm just wondering, is there another way to get the handouts? That just seems to be the easiest, to go back to our website and download those those resources that you have, your PowerPoint and everything.
Yeah, I think if you've got it posted on your website, or if you have a distribution list, feel free to attach the PDF and send it out if you wanted to do another email.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
either way it matters not to me.
Yeah. Well, folks, unless there's further conversation, which is welcomed if this is something that you would like to talk about. Otherwise, there will be a survey that is sent to you tomorrow. And as you answer that survey and put in your email information, you can be entered into the drawing that is so graciously being provided by Ant Credit Union. And also, if you feel like you want something mailed to you that you didn't see it in the handout, you didn't see it in the website, whatever, just let us know, and we'll try to get that to you. And please be honest with your critique, and please let us know if there are other ideas that you have, other topics that you think would be of interest that we're missing. That's how we all put this together. It was through comments such as yours from the surveys, that we were able to make this happen. So I guess that's it. One last opportunity for comments, concerns. Anybody want to do karaoke? That's good too. I believe there was a suggestion in the chat, Jane, something about a oddcoupleshousing.com.
Right. And I noted, I misspelled it on the slide because I added it late last night, and obviously wasn't paying enough attention, but it was.
Well, you did a good job. You did a good job. You did a good job. So, all right, folks, I hope you can join us for the next 5 weeks. They will be on Monday evenings at 4 o'clock. Please sign up at our website, download the handouts, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much, Jane, for all of your wisdom and your sharings. We so much appreciate all you have to share. And Ant Credit Union, thank you so much.
Enjoyed it. Blessings.
Good night, everybody. Good night.